Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Rosemary's Baby from 1968. And today is the fifth and final day of my Halloween week of videos. Happy Halloween. Rosemary's Baby is a very well regarded horror movie, and it's a favorite pretty much of every Halloween. I've watched it on a Halloween. Most people have actually seen several times. In fact, it's even hard to say no spoilers on this one because you probably already know the whole setup. A lot of that is kind of why it's such a genius film, that it can hold up to all of that. But it's also that a lot of the genius of Rosemary's Baby is perspective. And there's perspective of Rosemary, who's had something horrific happen to her, but doesn't know it, and has all these other people know what's happening to her, and she doesn't. And you're not sure if she's going crazy. She's not sure if she's going crazy. You're not sure if these are, in fact, witches or worshippers of the devil, or if it's all in her mind, or what exactly is going on. There's also a lot of layers to that perspective. The idea of being a pregnant woman, the whole kind of cliched thing of a pregnant woman saying to her husband, like, why did you do this to me? That whole idea of her husband very much doing this to her, of selling her body to the devil to birth the Antichrist, but also the fear of pregnancy and not exactly knowing what's going on, having something grow inside you, the horrific ideas of that, the unknowing of that, and that all plays into horror in general. And you have all that there, but you also have a really smart way that Roman Polanski and the writer of this book, Ira Levin, because this is a very faithful adaptation, which is the way they chose to tell this story, which brings up all those ideas. You have this idea of the rise of feminism. This is 1968, and the whole idea of that you kind of let all these guys like do what they want and you have no involvement in it, and what exactly are they doing, and maybe women should be taking a larger role to actually know what is exactly going on. And the whole idea of Rosemary's Baby uses all of those things. You can read into them very easily, and I think the idea of madness, which Roman Polanski talked about in other films like Repulsion, and then later and much less successfully in The Tenant, he uses this idea of city dwelling and the paranoia of your own mind and whether or not they are going crazy or there is something actually afoot. And that goes on throughout this entire film. It all works so naturally. It's a very interesting film in that it feels so composed. It feels so Hollywood. It's very much a Hollywood movie. You know, it's made by Paramount with a lot of money and all this stuff, and it feels that way. It doesn't feel as handheld and kind of grimy as the 70s would later. It feels a lot more controlled in a lot of ways, but it also has all these ideas running throughout it, and it kind of took on a lot of stuff that you wouldn't normally think would be there in a horror movie. This was very different for a horror movie at the time. It's still very different. Many people say it kind of opened the door for more paranormal, kind of psychological horror thriller type movies like The Exorcist, and then later The Omen. It brought these ideas to horror, but these ideas that were going on, and showing this in a way that was unnerving and different. And still to this day, like I'm talking about The Omen and The Exorcist, those don't flow like Rosemary's Baby do. Those weren't made like Rosemary's Baby at all. Rosemary's Baby is a unique artifact unto itself, and it shows this perspective of a woman who's put all her trust in this guy and is completely misled, raped, and totally just taken advantage of for his own selfish career and his goals. But it also gets into like a creepy Faustian bargain. It also gets into all these different layers in it. And I think the reason we can't really let Rosemary's Baby go for all this time is because it has all those things throughout it, and you can watch it so many different ways and read into it so many different times. But also because not knowing is fucking terrifying, and the idea that everybody around you is trying to do something like this is incredibly spooky and scary, while it's also still funny and a great mystery and a great perspective piece and a great character piece with a great performance, with amazing direction, makes you want to keep being scared by this tale and how it's told. A couple, Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse, who have moved into a new apartment complex in New York and make friends with the elderly couple living above them. Things are going fine, and then Rosemary really wants to have a baby as Guy's career is suddenly taking off. Rosemary is played by Mia Farrow and Guy is played by John Cassavetes. After having one night and having kind of like a drug trip after she's not sure what happens after having some like weird chocolate mousse from the neighbors and feeling like she was kind of raped by a demon or something. She wakes up and finds out that she was pregnant and is told that her husband actually took advantage of her while she was all drugged up or drunk or whatever she was. And even though that disturbs her, she's still kind of happy that she's pregnant, which is something they gloss over, which is like super fucked up. Like, just because you're married to someone doesn't mean you can take advantage of them if they're inebriated. But they like go through that and I'm like, holy fuck, really? Like, that's not cool. That is not cool. I do not like that at all. Rosemary, you should have gotten the fuck out of there right then, because that shit is fucked up. And actually, I wouldn't put it past that this guy has done that before, because he did kind of give her ovaries to Satan. So, I mean, it's within the realm of shit he would probably do. Well, I just blew the plot. Okay. But then after that, she's pregnant and her neighbors start taking her to a different doctor. They start insisting that she drink certain drinks. She starts losing weight and becoming paler. Weird occurrences are happening, and she starts hearing that these people might not be what they seem and something is afoot and they're not telling her something, but she's not sure if she's paranoid or something really evil is going on with her and her baby. Rosemary's Baby comes along kind of at the beginning of New Hollywood, 1968. It was the first American film of Roman Polanski. It was a massive hit. It was critically and commercially. It also showed what New Hollywood did, which was take a genre that everyone had underestimated and didn't think you could do a quote-unquote intelligent story with, and Roman Polanski absolutely did that. This was produced by William Castle. If you don't know who William Castle is, he did things like The Tingler, skeletons going back and forth through the theater. William Castle did those kind of stunts with his low-budget horror movies, did House on Haunted Hill, the original. He had the rights, but he wanted this to be his respectable movie to bring him to respectability, but he didn't have enough money to finance it, so he brought it to Paramount, and Robert Evans didn't want William Castle to direct, but had him produce, and brought in Roman Polanski. This was Polanski's first kind of adaptation, or first American adaptation at least, and he was very faithful. In fact, so faithful, most of these sections are exact excerpts from the book. Ira Levin was so happy with it because it was so extremely faithful. Most people think it's because he sort of didn't know what he was doing. I disagree, because the movie works so well. Apparently they shot like the entire book and then cut it down. It'd be cool if they would release that, I would think, as a DVD. I think people would freak out. Maybe it's best they don't do that, because this movie's pretty damn near perfect. Polanski went to such exhausting levels of detail. There's a part in the book where Guy Woodhouse actually says, I got the shirt that we saw in that issue of the New Yorker, New York Magazine. And Roman Polanski actually called Ira Levin and asked which issue that was from, because he wanted to get the shirt, because he kept looking through back issues and couldn't find it. And Ira Levin went, oh, I just kind of assumed there would be a shirt ad in that magazine, and sort of like made it up. And I don't know, I made it up. And so like that was the level of detail and accuracy to the novel, which I think is what made this so good. Now, how Ira Levin told this story, I think, is you can get into whole levels of, it's not what the story is, but it's how you tell it. And I think the story itself will be kind of like an interesting little anthology thing, but it's really like if you knew everything in the backwards deals that were going on, this movie wouldn't have the same feel and vibe to it. It's kind of like her paranoia builds with it. Your vibe as an audience member going like, something bad's gonna happen to her, you know something evil is afoot, and you kind of have to spoil the entire movie basically. But it's really not about knowing that. It's about going through and having her reveal, and that's the genius of it, because I don't really want a Rosemary's Baby where I know what's going on with Guy Woodhouse at the same time as what happened with Mia Farrow's Rosemary. That just frankly wouldn't work as well as the flow of this movie does. That's the real wonderfulness of Rosemary's Baby, is that it flows that way. And I'm so glad like Polanski, he had his editor kind of pick what to cut out and what not. There's even a cameo from Van Johnson and Joan Crawford. Rosemary mentioned she went to the Fantastics. Apparently they were in the Fantastics or at the Fantastics. Anyway, they go to a play and those two cameos were in it, and they cut out Joan Crawford and Van Johnson. You would have thought they would have kept it, but again, this cut sounds pretty good now that I think about it. But anyway, he did this again with the Stepford Wives, not as successfully, I don't think. Well, I didn't read the book, but the movie wasn't as good. And the whole idea of being kind of this housewife isolated within your home, having all this trust, you're not making the money, you're kind of dependent on someone. The idea that something evil could be going on and you're like, oh, I don't deal with that, my husband deals with that, and being completely betrayed by it. I think it shows kind of the deception of this kind of pre-feminist idea of being a wife and being so reliant on someone. And I think that's a very modern way to go about it. And this was very modern in a lot of ways. From Mia Farrow's pixie haircut is another example, which was a huge sensation at the time. They actually had Vidal Sassoon come out and do it, like fly out and do it and stuff. It seemed like no one could deny that this was such an interesting horror film because it plays on our preconceived notions of misunderstandings, from not understanding what's going on in your body with pregnancy to not understanding what your partner's doing to not fully understanding what people are saying about you and doing to your life that you don't actually recognize. It plays into all those things. And Polanski, another film that I would recommend by him is Repulsion, which does similar themes of playing with someone's psyche, and it's just a wonderful movie. The Tenet, not so much. In Rosemary's Baby, he plays with those in such a great way, and he plays off that paranoia, but he also has fun with it. There's a lot of funny moments in it. I love the repeating dialogue of like kind of the first, let's say, act or so, or the first part. So there's a lot of repeating of the dialogue from what Guy Woodhouse is in to things of that nature. This is a very long production. There's all sorts of problems from Mia Farrow getting divorced from Frank Sinatra, because he wanted her to be in Ocean's 11, not the one you saw with George Clooney. From Robert Evans trying to make sure Polanski didn't go too over budget, which they really went over schedule making this film, probably because they made a 4-hour film that no one would actually see, but whatever. And then William Castle and Roman Polanski not getting along, and then William Castle thought he had a curse and witches sent spells against anyone who made this movie. Blamed the Manson killings against Polanski's wife Sharon Tate on the witches that cursed them from this movie. You know, maybe you get a bunch of group of people together, some of them are gonna die. I don't know if it's a curse, but don't curse me. I wouldn't like that. It was kind of this massive production, and because this is such a masterly suspense film, it has echoes of Hitchcock. There's always this rumor he turned it down or was asked and turned it down. He was never asked, apparently. That's just a rumor. It has a kind of masterful direction. This is what a great horror director does. He takes a simple concept and turns it and has a real theory behind his concept. And it's almost like he had so many theories about it, he really could play and do a lot of interesting things with it. I think this is actually probably Mia Farrow's greatest performance. She is absolutely stunning in this movie. I think she's perfectly cast. I've never liked her as much as when I liked her in this film. At first you kind of underestimate her because she's like kind of just, you know, the normal housewife. You just kind of look at her as a normal person, and then once you're in it with her, care so much about her, but she plays off of, you know, your ignorance and her ignorance, and you're following her so much. She's so essential to this kind of film working in the way it does, and she gives an absolutely spellbinding performance. She has that vulnerability and the waifishness that you really need to look kind of more kind of clueless, but also look like all these evil things are happening to you. I think when she needs to look emaciated, she was already kind of looked like that, so it sort of worked. John Cassavetes is almost too perfect as well, as the guy who gave up his wife basically to the Satan because he wanted to become a great actor. Cassavetes apparently didn't really like that he got cast in this, and a lot of people said he was perfect for it and things like that. I think he is. I think he's rather good. But apparently he was kind of a pain in the ass. I love like Ruth Gordon and Sidney Blackmore, and this was actually the film that was Charles Grodin's big break, who was not in it for very long. But I love all the witches are older. I love the whole idea of an older New York building that always feels creepy and has so much history in it. You feel like there was some evil and occult things that used to go on back in the 30s or the 20s or something that you couldn't even fathom. You go down creepy, darker doorways that weren't architecturally designed that well for sunlight, and you're like, what's back here? What's so dark? They were mostly sets. They just shot the exteriors of the Dakota. I mean, it's like very obviously on a set, but he did it so well, I really believe the reality of it. If you've ever been into a large New York apartment, the way the light is in this movie feels very real. I think that's one of the things about this film, that the naturalism of the 70s is very much in this film, but it's still a Hollywood production. It's kind of one of those movies you're like, wow, that's an achievement. There's no way to deny what he really did with it because of all the themes he's talking about, all the things that we're already paranoid about, and the unknowing. And I think unknowing, as I've said a million times in a million horror movies, is scary. Not knowing something and the unknown is terrifying. And there's a lot of unknown in having a baby. There's a lot of unknown in trusting your partner. There's a lot of unknown in all these things. Rosemary's Baby plays on that so excellently that you're kind of scared and terrified by it, and how you realize anyone can go down this road. And you know how a lot of people do put up with these things for a very long time. It's actually fairly believable. And I think that's the thing about this kind of a horror movie, is it had this natural kind of slower moving vibe to it, that the Exorcist and Omen would sensationalize a lot more, but Polanski plays it like drinking a fine wine and then throwing it in your face before you expect it, and having that killer ending. I mean, it's just dark. It's so spooky. It's so, I think, thrilling in a way to watch, to get to that ending. It's such a great gothic horror story, but it plays off of all of these great feminist and perspective themes that make it just such an outstanding piece of work. Every 5 years or so, I end up watching Rosemary's Baby, and every time I'm like, wow, this is just such a fantastic motion picture. And you understand how he could be a great director and eventually do something like Chinatown later in the 70s, which Jack Nicholson apparently almost auditioned for this, but Polanski said he looked too menacing. Whereas Cassavetes, I think it works more just because of your preconceived notions of him, even our notions of him today, and especially our notions of him then. And Mia Farrow also works with that because of her relationship with Frank Sinatra, and many people didn't understand like what she was doing there, that she was being taken advantage of, and he's almost using our preconceived celebrity notion of her to use within this film. And that is why it became such a massive hit, because it plays with all your preconceived notions of all these things and makes it into a truly horrifying experience, like you actually bearing the Antichrist without actually having any prior knowledge of it. I think this is probably one of the great horror movies, and it's a reason people watch it every Halloween or every couple Halloweens, because it plays off of things that we all know and fears that we all already have, and you will probably have at one point in your life, or if you're going through them at the time. A lot of people say don't watch this if you're currently pregnant, because I think it gets a little too real and plays off of the ideas that we already know. And I think that's probably the most horrifying thing, is maybe life itself and playing off of those things, and then having it all be about Satan and this demonic presence. And something I've noticed through a lot of horror movies is the idea that these things that you think are normal, that freak you out, playing off them and showing that the devil and Satanism and demons are behind it makes it all that more evil, because you already think something's up with that shit anyway. Rosemary's Baby is a classic for a reason, and the reason you love to see, you know, the shot of her reacting that she gave birth to the devil's baby. It's that truly horrifying idea of being taken advantage of and not knowing you were until the last instant. And also, it's a great story told in a great way. So if you've seen Rosemary's Baby and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Thank you if you watched my Halloween week of videos. It's always cool to do 5 horror movie reviews right in a row like this. I never get really a reason to do past horror movies, so it's always cool to experience horror cinema and the history of it, and just to talk about it and watch these again and have an excuse to. So thank you, and I hope you all enjoyed these, and if you watched all of them, then an extra thank you, and I hope you all have a happy Halloween.